in three different ways. They are involved in setting an example and helping returning veterans move on with their lives. So first, I want to welcome Norbie Lara. Come on up, Norbie. Ryan Hansen and Larry Cormier. If you guys could all sit here, and then we'll discuss what they're all about. Let's start with you, Norbie, if you can stand. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background in the military and what led you to do with to what you're doing now and what it is you're doing now.
Well, following in the footsteps of my older brother, I joined the Army in 1995 as a military policeman, and I just wanted to serve my country and get the experience that I needed to come back and be a police officer. And as you can see, I was injured. In 2004, my squad and I were on a combat patrol in Bakuba, Iraq. And we're on the very last of our missions of a 24-hour operation. And we only had one patrol left, and that was to go and try and find insurgents. The other patrol that had gone out before us had gotten attacked, gotten ambushed. So it was our job to go out there and find them. About an hour into our patrol, I remember telling my driver to take a right-hand turn, and as soon as he finished that right-hand turn, I saw a really, really bright flash of light. My ears began to ring as the vehicle's slowing down. And the vehicle starts filling up with smoke, and I can tell this is an ambush. You can hear the small arms going off, and immediately training kicks in. And I tried reaching for the door. I was in the right front passenger seat. I kept trying to reach for the door. This is an ambush. We got to get out and engage the enemy. And I kept trying, nothing was happening, so I reached over with my left arm and I realized my entire right arm was gone. I immediately went into shock. As I was trying to make sense of what had just happened, my door was intact, but my arm was gone. It didn't make any sense. Miraculously, we had physician assistants that we had been escorting the entire day before on our forward operating base, and my driver was able to get the vehicle going again and get us out of the kill zone, back to the forward operating base, and the physician's assistants were there on the ground. I remember being taken to the hospital and closing my eyes for what I thought was going to be the very last time. I remember waking up, and the nurse could see I was visibly shaken and scared. As I'm looking down, and my arm is gone, and tubes are all over the place. And she said, "Sergeant Lara, you were involved in an ambush, and your vehicle was struck by a rocket-propelled grenade, and it went through your arm, and went through your lieutenant's arm, and exploded behind her, and that sent shrapnel through your seat, which lacerated your liver, and you inhaled when the rocket exploded, which severely damaged your lungs, and your liver was lacerated as well. And that's why they had to put you in a coma. And you've been in a coma for 2 months." And I'll tell you what, I'd never even met an amputee, and as I lay there in bed, I was scared. I had no idea what the future held for me. But it took me, about 3 months before I could walk again, talk again, and do all the things that most people take for granted. And, there was a lot of amazing opportunities out there. Nonprofit organizations were springing up and providing opportunities for folks who had lost arms, lost legs, had burns, traumatic brain injuries, taking them on ski trips, taking them on doing things that they had never done before. And because of being provided those opportunities, I was able to heal and realize that although my life had been changed forever, it wasn't over. And when I came home in 2006, I began working for another organization and providing opportunities for veterans to be around each other. And a few years ago, I left that organization and came back home. And I realized that here in the Valley was a definite need. Although I was traveling all over the country providing opportunities, I was really neglecting the Valley and not doing what was needed to be done here. So we founded an organization called A Combat Veterans Hope last year. And this organization is a veteran-led organization. We're all combat vets that run this organization. We've all been through it. We've all been lost when we came home. We've all felt like we were entirely alone. And we've all, post-traumatic stress is something that's very real. And, I'm a suicide survivor myself. I attempted a few times to take my own life. And currently, the suicide rate is at 20 veterans per day that are taking their lives. And what we're trying to do is educate our veterans and let them know that they are not by themselves, educate their families, and let them know that, there are resources out there, and they're not by themselves in their struggle. And, we love our veterans. We're proud of them. By the grace of God, I'm still here. And by the grace of God, we're able to do what we do for our veterans absolutely free. We all love this country, and we love those that served. And there's a lot of folks out here in the Valley. They want to make a difference as well, so we give them the opportunity to do that. But anyway, I thank you so much for allowing me to come up here and share my story. Thank you.
Don't sit down yet. Amen. That story on its own brings hope to people who don't have any. But can you give us an example, Norbie, of some of the ways that you connect vets with each other and maybe the impact that you've seen in veterans' lives through the activities that a Combat Veterans Hope provides?
So the most of the things that we do is we provide engagement for our veterans and for their families. Last year we were able to take, I believe it was 75 veterans and their families over to Wild Water Adventures absolutely free. We just had our Easter event. We had 80 veterans and their families there watching all these little kids do Easter egg hunts and meeting each other and stuff like that. But the biggest thing is...
He's have a big head.
The biggest thing that happened this last Easter was a veteran came up and he said, you know what you're doing is working, right? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, every time I come, I see that guy right there, and we connect and we talk to each other about what we're doing, and what you're doing is working, so thank you so much. And I tell him, I'm like, I don't do the work, brother, you do. I'm just giving you the guidance and the support and the resources that you need. You're doing all the work. To be proud of that. But that's what we do. A while back, when organizations were coming out here, they would do an event every 3 months and then they'd leave. And we're trying to do, we have 3 events coming up in a month, which is incredible. These men and women, they just want opportunities to realize that they're not by themselves. And engagement is very key to this whole road to recovery after combat. You can't. I don't believe that you can go to combat and come back the same. I don't believe that human beings are made for that. But it's a burden we bear proudly, so that those back home don't have to.
Really quick, one last question. And if you guys think of questions you have for our panel, save them for the end. Hopefully we'll have a little time. I just don't want to shortchange any of them. But I do want to ask you, if people here are moved by what you just said and they want to support your organization, how can they do that?
I do have pamphlets with us here that explain what we do as an organization. But also you can visit acvhope.org to get involved there. We're always looking for volunteers, and we're always looking for, of course, treasure. So.
Amen.
Yes, sir.
So acvhope.org if you guys want to check it out. Norbie, thanks again.
Yes, sir.
Again, think of questions for later. Let's have Ryan Hansen next. So Ryan, tell everybody a little bit of your story and how that's propelling you to what you're taking on now.
So thanks for getting me all choked up, brother, right before talking. So I'm Ryan Hansen. I've gotten the pleasure of meeting quite a few of you in this room through Tom. Thank you for connecting us. But so I'll back up. Before the military, I grew up in very, very healthy homes. So I had Christian parents. They were missionaries, so I always knew what right looked like. But despite that, when I came home from the mission field, I was 17 and knew it all. and very, very quickly went down every wrong trail that you can go down. So from drugs to chasing girls, alcohol, the works. Obliterating all of my training and education that I knew better. And so my answer to all of that was to make my mom freak out even more when I announced to her that, hey, Ma, I joined the Army. So in 2004, I shipped out to Fort Benning. So I did basic training and airborne school. And I started as a radar repair, but I did most of my 8-year career in special operations. I was psychological operations. Which sounds a lot cooler than it actually is. So during that time, God started working in my heart and figuring out, and I was spending time figuring out what right looks like. And I met my wife, or re-met my wife, and fell madly in love. So we got married, had our first kid. Second one was on the way, and I realized that what I was doing was not conducive to being a good daddy and husband. So we got out in 2012, and that started the regrowth. So we got out, and there were definitely some mental injuries, some physical injuries that needed to heal, and that's when God grabbed my life and said, all right, let's do this. And so I started learning everything that I could about finances, let the Army pay for a master's degree with the GI Bill, and just started this path. And I realized that I was the person that needed to show these young guys coming out of the military that they can do it too. So instead of living their life as having peaked at 23, labeled as a hero because they did 4 years, that's the springboard for the rest of your life. So in short, that's how End Average was born. So End Average is a ministry that I'm trying to grow. Essentially, it's not geared specifically towards veterans, but I definitely resonate with them because I know what they're going through. The new guys coming out are losing camaraderie, and they're losing structure. And the loss of those two things can be absolutely devastating because they have a choice where they get to say, I get to wallow in my post-traumatic stress, or whether there is no injury or post-traumatic stress, they decide, oh, there's a lot of free stuff out there, I'm just going to live that way and do the bare minimum possible to get by. And that sucks. Nobody should live like that. That's average. And so the other path is to saddle up next to somebody who knows what they're talking about, who's been through it, in the form of mentorship or a small group. And so I'm building materials that a small group leader, that a men's ministry leader in a church can use to guide the conversation. And that's where End Average was born, because the average is not good enough. And so I spend my time with that. I have a full-time job. I have 4 beautiful kids and an amazing wife who holds us all together. And so in the spare time that I do have, I would be happy to come work with whoever that men's ministry leader in your church is to help attract the millennials back. The only way we're going to correct the next generation, get it back on course, is through relationships and touch points. That's not a one-time breakfast that's going to solve them. It's not a once-a-month pep talk. That's a relationship. And so I do that through teaching. Essentially, it's called the League of Imperfect Gentlemen, where we saddle up with guys and we just show them what right looks like, and we let God do the work in their heart.
And from your time in the service, and you gave us a great overview there of some of the battles you faced and what you went through, what was the most challenging thing that you faced in your time in the Army?
Once I was married, shortly after that, as special operations, we deployed quite a bit. It was the frequency of being gone, but I went to Afghanistan, and just a few close calls, too many, made me really focus on the gift that I'd been given and a beautiful wife who somehow had conned into marrying me. I guess PSYOP worked on that. It was a very fine balancing act to not trigger anxiety and depression in her because I'm gone and can't talk to her. And so that really, that helped focus those priorities. But definitely, Iraq, Afghanistan. That's living under constant stress and pressure for 18 months at a time, 6 months, never knowing if tomorrow is going to be the day. So the mental stress was much worse than the few physical things that happened.
That's the perfect segue to our next speaker. Let's give Ryan a hand, and if you've got questions for him, why don't you tell us a little bit of your military background, how you became so intimately involved in this front line of the mental battle veterans face, and what you're doing now through Link Care.
Okay. Well, talking about mental stress, speaking in front of an audience, Vietnam's easier than that. But this gentleman here helped things out when I walked in. He said, "Hey, do you have any eligibility left?" that made me feel good. I'm a local guy, 1963 class of Edison High School, who won the state track championship that year, by the way, and I was on that team. I went into service in 1968, and I served time in a place called Da Nang, Vietnam. I was in the Air Force. I was an air policeman. And I was not in the jungle in combat, but we got blasted every night with mortars and rockets. So I get out of the service and I come back and I go to graduate school and I become a counselor, a therapist. And my journey to Link Care is, as I look back retrospectively, is just really ordained by God. So I work for the county mental health, and so my first encounter with veterans were, of course, the homeless, indigenous type with mental situations. And then I had a part-time private practice, and I don't know if you remember Champus, the old Champus. So I became a Champus provider, and I was seeing veterans through Champus, Vietnam veterans. And then later on, Desert Storm. And Champus was such a terrible insurance that ended up, it was easy for me to see them free than to do all the paperwork and for what they paid through Champus, okay? And so I was a therapist for many years, and then my journey towards Link Care started when I was at the Mennonite Seminary. I was a clinical supervisor for students to be counselors, coming to be counselors. And one of my students ended up over at Link Care Center, and she told Link Care about me. And Link Care already had something in their heart about working with veterans. What's the term, serendipitously? Well, I'm minding my own business in 2005, and I get a call from TRICARE West, saying, hey, we're going to have a new project, a pilot project. We want to embed a provider with the National Guard. So I said, yeah, you know, that sounds good. So I was embedded with the 1072nd Transportation Unit out there in the Air National Guard. They had just come back from Iraq. And so I was embedded with them, which means that I stay with them all the time. I go to drills with them and things like that. So I did that for a couple of years. And then one day my phone rings again, and it says, hey, we have a contract with the Department of Defense. We want to send you to military bases throughout the United States and work with guys and families coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. So I said, okay. I was more intimidated with I had to sign up on a computer, and I'm computer challenged. So once I got through that, my first assignment was Fort Polk, Louisiana in August. So I was at Fort Polk, and I worked there with that assignment. They have two assignments. One is for children and one's for adults. And I was certified with working with children and adults. So my first assignments were working with children of the people deployed and the challenges of children and the spouse that's left behind. So from there, I went to Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne in wintertime. And I had some real good choices. And so I was in Cheyenne, and the only thing I saw on base was reindeer. because it's a missile site, so nobody's around. Everybody's underground someplace. And so while I was there, the shooting happened at Fort Hood. So I volunteered to go to Fort Hood. They needed about 50 people at Fort Hood, but I was still on assignment there. And they had enough people, so they didn't send me to Fort Hood. So while I was there, I got another phone call. And this phone call said, hey, we understand you have some background and you're a veteran. We want to embed you with the combat brigade. I said, yeah, okay. And they said, this is going to be a 90-day. And you solo, isolated. Your family, your wife can't come to see you or anything like that. So I said, okay. So I was embedded with the Triple Nickel Combat Engineering Brigade for 90 days. These guys were just coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, both places. And I worked closely with the chaplains. I would give briefings when they came in, ask questions, listen to them. A lot of stories about breakups while they were gone. I would tell them about how to deal with their anxiety and their that spirit of what is that called? Huh?
Angst.
Angst, yeah. I said you can't be speeding down the highway 100 miles an hour, and you can't be stopping every brown bag you see on the side of the road. And we talked about that. We talked about domestic things, and so I did that. So I had shared that with one of the students over at the Mennonite Seminary. So she had a lunch with me with Phil Collier, and so Phil, I was trying to retire. I was trying to retire, and so Phil talked me into coming out to Link Care. So what we do at Link Care, it seems like we mainly work with the National Guard, because a lot of the regular veterans have the VA hospital to go to, but the Guard, they don't have that. And so most of the things we've done mainly is marriage and family counseling. I've done that, and assessments. And also we offer a Christian-based counseling, because there's also a thing called being morally wounded. And morally wounded is when everything that you believe in, that you were taught as a Christian, just goes upside down in war. Instead of the best of you coming out, the worst of you come out, and the most primitive part of you kicks in. And so I've been at Link Care how long now?
2.5 years, I think.
More, that's all? Okay. And so that's my story.
Yeah. Great. So I know you can't go into, a case-by-case basis, and we wouldn't want you to. But if these folks have friends, acquaintances who are returning veterans, is there something you would tell them to watch out for as far as signs that maybe they need some counseling, they need to come talk to somebody like you, or maybe some advice or suggestions for how they can be a support for veterans who are in that tenuous spot?
Yeah, I think churches especially, veterans are pretty sneaky. We hide things very well, but isolation, excessive use of substances, being angry, going from 0 to 100 in no time, as this young vet and I were talking about. Those are things. I think the stigma of getting help is diminishing now, and part of that we hear reports for all of us that were doing that work I told you on military bases. That we were there to augment what was already going on bases, and we never kept notes. We never kept any records of what we did, and that. One of the things I saw on base, though, sometimes was that it was easier for the officers to come see us than the enlisted men. The officers could just leave and come see us, but the enlisted men had to get permission from the first sergeant or somebody. And so that was a tough. Some of the cases I saw was Oxycontin addiction. A lieutenant, first lieutenant, and his wife both addicted, but she could get treatment, but he was afraid to get treatment because he'd lose his top secret, his clearance, and he would be kicked out of the military. So he's struggling, trying to cure himself of his addiction. Some of the other problems I saw were married couples deployed different places, trying the one at home, trying to deal with the children. And sometimes there's an ex, a baby's mama involved while they're overseas. And so just all the dynamics we just see. It's there with the military, but it's more compounded by that.
Couple, I think, important questions. How much do the veterans pay for counseling at Lincare?
Zero. We offer 10 free counseling sessions.
So the next question is, how do you pay for that?
Well, we depend on donations and contributions from the community and churches to take care of that.
And when you said, that you offer Christian-based counseling as well, so it's either or, right? If a veteran says, I just want straight counseling, I don't want to hear about this Bible stuff, you can accommodate that. Yeah. But where you differ from the VA in many cases, if he comes to you and says, I want specifically Christian counseling, you can provide something that really very few others can. Do I have that right?
Yes.